All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Sherman, and I'm the coordinator of the Canadian Council on Invasive Species. Thank you very much for joining us today. We actually have over 95 people registered for this webinar today, so that's awesome. So I just wanted to show my face to introduce myself, and I'll introduce Ken in a bit, but there's Ken as well, our speaker for today. But we're going to shut off our video for the remainder of the presentation and maybe turn it on for questions afterwards, but we'll just save bandwidth for now. So we'll see you in a bit, but I'm just going to do some quick introductions right here. Yeah, so like I said, thank you again for attending today. This is the third day of our kind of week of webinars for our National Invasive Species Awareness Week, the winter one that we have this month. So today's presentation is actually called Behavior Change 2.0, the Essential Upgrade, and our speaker is Ken Donnelly from Beyond Attitude Consulting. I would just also like to formally begin this webinar by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Okay, getting into the presentation, I'm really pleased to give a warm welcome and introduction to Ken Donnelly. I'm sure some of you on the webinar are familiar with Ken. For almost 30 years, Ken has worked with government and non-government organizations to foster positive individual behaviors, primarily in the areas of environment, health, transportation, and occupational health and safety. So for the past 10 years, his primary focus has been on the human dimensions of invasive species. I just want to say that Ken has worked very closely with us, and we're really pleased to have him once again take another part of his day for us. So I won't give too much context, so I'll let Ken get started actually right into the presentation.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Kelly, and thanks everyone for coming. I would like to, before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Mi'kma'ki. I'm in Mi'kma'ki right now, and that is the traditional land of the Mi'kmaq in what is now Nova Scotia, Canada. So I do recognize some names in the panelists, so in the attendees. Welcome to everybody, and in addition to being the president of Beyond Attitude Consulting, I'm also a chair of the Nova Scotia Invasive Species Council. I'm going to talk today, some of you have seen me talk about behavior change or have behavior change training, and this isn't just behavior change training. This is essentially, I'm calling it cheekily, the Behavior Change 2.0, the essential upgrade, but it's about tweaking the behavioral psychology aspects that we use in our outreach programs in order to make our outreach programs more effective. I'm not going to go through all the details on training, but I will go through how we can make it better. So I do recognize, though, that not everyone in the audience has had behavior change training or community-based social marketing training. So I'm just going to establish sort of a common ground at the beginning here. The most important reason and fundamental reason to use behavioral psychology when we're doing outreach is because there's a huge gap between attitude and awareness and actions. People can have the right attitude, they can have the right awareness, but won't necessarily take the action that we might want. My favorite example, I've been using it for 20 some years now, is blood donation. I often start I almost always start any workshop or training that I do or speaking to a group by asking people to put up their hand if they think blood donation is a good idea. And I've spoken to over 10,000 people in the last 20 years, and virtually everybody puts up their hand and says, yes, blood donation is a good idea. So, so that's great that they believe that. I then will point to people in the audience and I'll say, Do you think blood donation is a good idea? And if so, why? You know, what's the benefit of it? And people will say yes. Well, it's because I could save a life, or it's in you to give. It's a renewable resource. You might save your own life. Like right off the top of their head, they can very quickly give a reason why blood donation is a good idea. And so from that, I assume that everybody thinks blood donation is a good idea and they know all of the benefits of doing it. However, in Canada, only 3.5% of people donate blood. In the US, it's 3.8%. In the UK, it's about 3.5%. It's the same sort of situation all around the world. Really high attitude and awareness, really low participation. In Canada, only half of people can donate blood, but only 3.5% do. And this phenomenon applies to a lot of different things. You can probably think of things in your own life, like you might think that, well, I want to eat better, but you continue to make the same choices, or I want to exercise more, but you don't get off the couch and you watch television instead. Or you might say, well, I should really check in more often with my mom or somebody and phone someone, but you don't get around to doing it. We all do those kinds of things, and psychologists call it the intention action gap. And it means that you have an intention to do something, but you don't take that action. So because for varying reasons. What we need to take home from that is that we can't just convince people something is a good idea and expect that the behavior will follow. We can't just convince somebody that they should be brushing their boots to remove mud and invasive species when they come off a trail, and expect they're going to do it just because they made that, that they believe it's a good thing to do. The behavior doesn't always follow. So you still have to have the right attitude and the right awareness, and it's important to do that, continue to do that, to promote these things as part of your outreach, but we really have to address the behavior as well. So we should also always think of the innovation adoption curve. The innovation adoption curve is used, whether it's product innovation or a new idea or a new behavior. This curve represents the people in the target audience that for us, is the people that we want to change their behavior. So under that blue bell curve, the whole population that we want to deal with is under there, no matter whether it's all people in North America, whether it's all people in Canada, whether it's everybody in Ontario, or whether it's much more clearly defined, like the people in New Liskeard who go fishing. Whatever that target population is, they're all under this curve. And we have to recognize that, as you can see here, we've got people on the left-hand side called innovators and early adopters that will get involved in the program and adopt these behaviors just because they know they should, because they ought to, and they have that right awareness and attitude. These are the 3.5% of blood people who give blood. They live on that left-hand side of the curve. All of us in the audience today that are here for this webinar, we'd be in that 2.5%, or at least in that 13.5% that's beside it, the early adopters, because we believe in that we should be stopping the spread of invasive species. So when we're working on these programs, we know that those people will get involved in the, it will adopt their behavior readily. As we go from left to right, you've got people in the early majority that these psychological tactics will help people get the behavior more readily for the early majority, but those other people to the right are going to be tougher. Eventually we get over the 50% mark there and we get into the late majority. Things like peer pressure, because people in the late majority audience, part of the audience, are seeing other people doing it and they start thinking, oh, maybe I ought to be doing this too. They've got peer pressure that will work on them, and eventually those people will come along. And the laggards over on the right-hand side, it will take a long time to get those people, and they might never adopt their behaviors. But when you are talking to somebody and you're getting them to change their behavior, you don't know where that person lies in here. You don't know if it's a person over on the left who, as soon as you tell them that you really ought to be doing this, that they're going to start doing it, or if they're a late majority person or a laggard, that you're going to tell them and they're just going to dismiss it. And it's going to take quite a bit of work before that you can bring them on board. So we need to use these tools. So that's the fundamental part of this. Now, research is really, really important. And I find that a lot of people that I run into, and even I've had clients who skip the research point and they think that they know everything they need to know just to go ahead and start changing brochures or do whatever they think they need to do because they're such experts. But we can't be experts on what other people think. We need to ask people why they don't perform certain behaviors. So, and find out what the barriers are. That's an important part of the research. We also want to measure their existing behavior so that we can change the behaviors if they have to, so we know what the barriers are and we can remove them in order to get them to adopt these behaviors. So literature reviews are really important. We do literature reviews all the time, check to see if there's any research that's already been done and helps us out with the program, take advantage of the work that people have done. With surveys, they're great because you can do a survey of say 384 people. It's usually 384 people for any population, and then you can extrapolate the results to the rest of the audience. The rest of your target audience, and then the focus groups you can drill down on. Something that we don't do that as often, and I really think we should be doing, is more observations, because we can do observations rather than surveys where if you ask somebody if they do the right thing, they're likely to say yes even if they aren't. Observations, you see people, you watch people, and you find out if they're doing the right things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can use observations a bit more. But I do want to say with surveys, conduct online surveys. And the reason I say that, back in the 90s, the gold standard was to do random telephone surveying, random telephone dialing surveying. And that was because you had fairly high rates of responses. Now, the response rates are really low for telephone surveys. They've gone from, when I started doing surveys around 1992, we used to get 60% of people, when you called them, they would say yes to a survey. Now it's down around 6%. So because of that, you're not getting a very good sample of the audience and it's your target audience, and it costs a lot of money to do that many telephone surveys. Where if you put a survey online, it's you can get a lot more people. We typically get 1,500 to 2,000 people for our surveys instead of 300 or 400 because we go online, and you can do it for a lot cheaper. So very large sample sizes of 1,800, say, or so, that creates a pretty good sample size that even though it's online, you can still rely on the sample size as being representative. Now, observations, on the other hand, we've done programs where we've had students sit out at boat launches or in other areas observing with a clipboard, and they sit out there for 2 weeks straight, watching and recording behaviors. We've also run programs where we put cameras up, and with the cameras up, then we don't have to have somebody sitting there. Also, when somebody's sitting there, the fact that they're there may change the person's behavior, the subject's behavior, because they may think, oh, I'm being watched, I should do this. And you don't want that. So putting cameras up is great because you're not having an effect on their behavior. And you can just go at the end of the day, take out the SD card and take a look. They always have motion detectors on them, and take a look and see how many people came. You know, if it's in front of if it's at a brush station, you know how many people did brush their boots, how many people didn't, and that sort of thing. Now, you have to be careful with putting cameras up, and maybe, you know, if you work for a government, that just won't be allowed because they're afraid the blowback might be bad if people found out that they were being taped. but it's not illegal in most places to have a camera out where people are out in public. If you're not willing to use cameras, there's another thing which I call the dodge. Use dodges is that if you are going to say again, have somebody out where the boot brush station is, and you're going to have them record whether or not people use it. A good way to be more discreet is to walk up to those people when they're coming off the trail and ask them some questions that have nothing to do with what you're trying to gather. So you might say, okay, well, how'd you like the trail? How'd you find out about the trail? Are you from this area? Are you a visitor? Are you a tourist? Ask them 4 or 5 questions, thank them very much, go back and sit on your lawn chair, and you can throw all that out if you want, throw it in the garbage. What you're really recording is, did they see the boot brush station? Did they use it, for instance? So that's another way to make sure that you're not having an impact on their behavior, but they're but you're still gathering the information that you want. So just some techniques. Now, it's really important to remove barriers. I've had quite a few clients who have contacted me after having training, and they've gone through implementation of a program, and they've said, you know, this doesn't seem to be working as well as we thought. You know, we put all these brochures out, and you know, we're not getting as much change in behavior as we expected. The first thing I always ask them is, did you find out what the barriers are? And then the second thing I ask is, did you remove the barriers? And quite often they don't. And it's so important to remove the barriers. If you get, in fact, Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize for behavioral economics, says that for behavior change, the #1 thing is to make it easier, make it more convenient, find out what the barriers are and remove them. If you have something that's difficult to do, like for instance, if you're talking about people coming off a trail and you want them to remove the mud and invasive species off their boots, if there's no boot brush station there, and they don't have a boot brush of their own, a handheld one that they've brought, they're not going to be able to do it. You can't get that mud and all that stuff off your boots, get it all off with your hands. So there's the barrier. So those boot brush stations take that barrier away. Some people may have handheld brushes. I have 100 in my garage. But if I forget to take it with me, I'm not going to be able to do it. Same thing, you know, we ask people to take the drain plugs out of their boats to drain them. Well, for my boat, you need a wrench. You can't just pull it out. So if I don't have a wrench, I carry one in my glove compartment in the boat. But if I didn't have one, there's a barrier. I can't drain my boat. So you need to find out what the barriers are, and you have to remove them. And I emphasize that because, as I say, some people just don't do it. So remove barriers. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is, for those who've had the training, you all know that commitment and reminders and social norms are important elements of behavior change. What I've come to realize over the years though, is that all 3 of those elements have to be in place, and they have to be knitted together. They have to work together in order for programs to be most effective. So you can't just say, okay, well, we'll gather commitments and then expect that that's going to do it for behavior change. If you get commitments from people, behavior change is hard. So you need to support them in their commitment. If somebody has said, okay, I'm going to clean, drain, and dry my boat when I come out of the water, or I'm going to buy firewood locally and burn it locally and not move firewood, they may, after that commitment, you have to remind them that they're going to be getting their firewood at the park when they get there. If you don't remind them, they may just simply forget. We find that a lot in our research is people want to do things and they just forget. And so you don't get the behavior change if you don't have the commitment and the reminders together. And it's only when you've got a whole bunch of people that are performing the behavior and they're reminded to do it, that other people start seeing that people around them are performing the behavior. So then you start to establish the social norm. And So all three of those things have to be together. And not only do they have to be together to hold the stool up and be most effective, but they work together and their impact is greater than the sum of their parts. So I'm going to talk about each one of these things, each of these, because all three of them are so important. First of all, with commitments, those people who have taken training know that this is where the psychology comes into play, is that when people make a commitment and they say, okay, I'll brush my boots, or I'll clean, drain, dry my boat, or I'll take my, at the end of the season, I'll take my hanging baskets and throw them in the garbage rather than throw them over the fence into a park. I will do these things. When they make that promise, they change their self-image. And people who change their self-image, it's very important in our society to be consistent with what you say. So they're very likely to actually perform the behavior if they've committed to somebody that they will. And so it's really important that we seek commitment at every opportunity, like this fellow here in the picture who's getting a written commitment from a guy who who's just been shown how to clean, drain, and dry his boat. So it's really important. But what we've been finding in a bunch of different jurisdictions is that people are hiring outreach people to work out in the field, say all summer. A lot of times our invasive species outreach is mostly done in the warmer months for invasive species. They're getting to the end of the season and they're finding out that those workers have not asked for commitments. And it's too late. And I have a client who did 650,000 watercraft inspections last year, and they didn't ask. Found out at the end of the season that the watercraft inspectors weren't asking for commitments, even though they were prompted to electronically on a device every time that they spoke to somebody. The feedback was, well, I just wasn't comfortable doing it, so I didn't. So you have to, when you're hiring people and you're training them, you have to make sure that they understand it's right in their job description. When you are talking to somebody about this program, it's not just to tell them it's important and that sort of thing. You have to ask them for a commitment. And in fairness to those people, if you're managing them, or if you have other people that work for you that are managing them, you've got to make sure those supervisors train those people how to ask for the commitments, know that it's important, but they have to check on them. Don't wait until the end of the summer. The person's out in the field for a week or two, contact them, go visit them, call them, whatever, and say, how's it going? Are you enjoying yourself? You have a lot of traffic there or whatever. And they say, so how are the commitments going? And if they give you any indication at all that they're not getting commitments and they're not asking them, you've got to deal with it right away and tell them, look, this is your job. And maybe show them, you talk to the next person and ask for a commitment, model it for them, but you have to correct that. And we're finding, as I say, a lot of programs, they're only finding out at the end of the season that people just were uncomfortable to ask for commitments, so they didn't bother. And you can't let that happen. Commitments are too important. But then changing behavior is hard. So when somebody, after they've made the commitment, you want to help them. And so you want to remind them, and in order to help them. So we all know that having a sign at the right place at the right time with the right information is really important. And having a fridge magnet to telling people that they should grow me instead, or that they should not move firewood, or that they should clean their boats. That's not the right place for a reminder like that. A sign at a boat landing reminds somebody to clean their boat, because that's where they're supposed to do it. It doesn't help if it's in the kitchen. If you have a grow me instead brochure in a drawer in your kitchen, that's not going to help somebody who gets into the garden center and says, oh yeah, I shouldn't buy invasive species. Where's that information I had? So you have to have it at the right place at the right time when the people should be making these decisions. So I think we know that. I don't think it's done enough. We should make sure that we do it properly, but there's something else, another element of a reminder is that we just haven't been using. And we found that behavior change, researchers have determined behavior change are really powerful. Now, behavior change this is how they work, is you have a trigger, and then you have a thought, and then you have an action, and then you have a result. So as, for instance, if somebody comes off the hiking trail, sort of keep using the same example, but it helps with the message. And they see a boot brush station there, that's a trigger. And it reminds them of their commitment, or just reminds them that they can get nice clean boots. So that's the trigger. And then the thought is, oh yes, I should clean the mud off my boots. They go over, they scrub their boots, read the sign while they're doing it, and that's the action that you wanted. And then the result, of course, is that they're not moving invasive species around. They come out of the water with their boat. The trigger is there's a sign there that says clean, drain, and dry your boat. And they say, oh yes, I'm supposed to clean, drain, and dry my boat. They clean, drain, and dry their boat. The result is you're not moving invasive species. You have a poster on the door of the garden center, it says grow me instead. That's a trigger, and they think, oh yes, and then they can go, they'll remember to ask people, you know, is this invasive, before they buy it, so you're not moving invasive species. So we can use behavior change, but we can simplify it quite a bit. And BJ Fogg, who is a professor of behavioral psychology and has written a really good book called Tiny Habits, he talks about making personal changes and helping other people make personal changes. But what he talks about is using a behavior chain, but it's as simple as hooking a new behavior onto an existing behavior. And the construct that he's come up with is so simple. It's after I do this, I will do that. So as an example, I'm trying to get my kids to put the cap back on the toothpaste. They're really good at brushing their teeth. I don't have to remind them. They always brush their teeth before going to bed, but they don't put the cap back on the toothpaste. So what I've said to them is, we stood in the bathroom and we looked at the toothpaste and we said, and I got them to say, after I brush my teeth, which they always do, I will put the cap on the toothpaste. Now, it doesn't always work, but they're learning to hook the new behavior onto the old one. And once it gets hooked on really well, and they've done it a few times, it's going to become part of the whole habit, and they're not even have to think about it. And we can do that with people, with invasive species. We can say that after I come off the trail, I will brush my boots. After I'm finished with my hanging basket, I will put it in the garbage. After I come out of the water with my boat, I will clean, drain, dry. So we can construct, we can use that construct in order to help people to remember to adopt new behaviors, because they just hook it onto something they're already doing. And it makes it much, much easier. So I think that's something you have to look for opportunities to do that, to make your programs more effective. And then the other thing that I just want to talk about is social norms. Now, people who've had training know all about social norms. And social norms are really good for getting those people on the right-hand side of that curve that I showed you earlier. And because there's a peer pressure of, you know, when people make commitments, they have internal pressure, they create internal pressure that they should take certain habits. When they see other people doing it around them, that's external pressure to conform, that peer pressure. So we can really use social norms in order to get those people that are less readily likely to take on our behaviors. Now, this example here is from British Columbia, their Clean, Drain, Dry program they're working on right now. They're in the third year of a 3-year pilot project, and they came up with this vinyl sticker. Now, the program's called Clean, Drain, Dry. If it just says clean, drain, dry rather than I clean, drain, dry there, that's a really good way, the nice graphics and everything, really good way of announcing the program reminding people there is a clean, drain, dry program. It's more of a noun. I look at that, even it says, though, to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. Just seeing clean, drain, dry is more of a noun because it's just it says what the program is. But you add I onto it, that just one letter, and now this becomes much, much more powerful. It's I clean, drain, dry is more like a verb. It's an action. I clean, drain, dry. And the thing is, if somebody takes that sticker and puts it on the windshield of their car, sorry, the windshield of their boat or onto their trailer, and it says, I clean, drain, dry, now they're making a public commitment just by putting that on the windshield. And we all know that a public commitment is much stronger than a written commitment, which is much stronger than a verbal commitment. And we want public commitments. So they're going to feel that, oh, people can see that I've said that I clean, drain, dry, I better clean, drain, dry. It's also a reminder, because when they're standing on their trailer and they're winching their boat up onto it, and the boat's coming closer and the windshield's getting bigger, that sticker's getting bigger, and they can see it, and it reminds them, oh yeah, I got to clean, drain, dry. But thirdly, and these are the three legs of the stools, reminding people of the commitment and making a public commitment, and also because that sticker is on there, when other people are walking by and they see that sticker on the windshield, it helps create a social norm, and people will start to say, oh yeah, there's another one of those stickers. I keep seeing those stickers. It seems that a lot of people are cleaning, draining, and drying. Maybe I should be doing that too. So it helps to create the social norms. One of the things to make our programs more effective, because we never have enough money to do everything we want, we can make a like this simple vinyl sticker, and they don't cost very much to produce. And it does the reminder, the commitment, and it does the social norm building for us. So we need to look for opportunities like that. And again, we're bringing the three-legged stool to so our program's more efficient. All right. One of these men is a liar, the other is not. So if you put this picture up and we have some people from the States here, and I think they would agree with this, is that some people would look at this and say, Donald Trump is a liar and Dr. Fauci is not. But there'll be a lot of other people who will look at it and say, Dr. Fauci is a liar and Donald Trump is not. Now, there'd be very few people who would say both of those men are liars, and very few people that would say both of those people tell the truth. I put this up because this is a different kind of social norm, and I think these two men can really drive home the point here, is that if you have a trusted leader, that's a kind of social norm in behavioral psychology, is when you have somebody who is a mentor and who promotes the proper behavior, rather than getting the peer pressure of everybody around you doing it. They're modeling it, and you know you ought to do it because this person that you admire is doing it. So Dr. Fauci, there was other people involved, obviously, but Dr. Fauci is trusted by a lot of people, and he convinced a lot of them to wear masks in the United States. Donald Trump is trusted by a lot of people. 74 million people voted for him. They believe he tells the truth. And he said he wouldn't wear a mask. People can do it if he wants. He mocked people that were wearing masks. Even members of Congress on the Republican side of the aisles won't wear masks as a result of Donald Trump's leadership. And somebody said to me, okay, all this behavior change stuff and all of that, it didn't work in the United States with the masks. Not everybody's wearing masks. My answer was, no, it worked really, really well. Unfortunately, one of the leaders, and who's respected by about half the people almost half the people in the country, he just picked the wrong behavior. He promoted the wrong behavior, but everybody's doing what he suggested. So, but you can use that example to see that having that kind of social norm where you have a leader is really helpful. That leader can be a celebrity bass fisherman or something like that, a gardener, well-known gardener. Those people, if they're used as part of your program, they can be very, very helpful. And I want to talk, before I wrap up here, and this is the last bit I'm going to talk about, is loss aversion. So well, I think the first and most profound finding of behavioral economics was the fact to find out that people have a more negative, have a great negative reaction to loss than they do to a positive reaction of gain. And the best way I can explain that, it's actually a fairly complex complex issue. However, a good way to explain it is that if you're walking down the road and you find $50 in the gutter, you're going to have a certain amount of emotion. We'll call it elation. Hey, I just found 50 bucks. This is great, right? If you walk down the street and you had $50 in your pocket, but you reach in and you can't find it, you're going to have despair, a certain amount of despair, because you lost $50. Well, rational people, you would think, would be just as happy, have that much emotion, happiness and elation to find $50. You think that would be equal to the amount of emotion they have at losing $50, because it's $50 either way, right? But it's not the case. Loss aversion teaches us that people do not like loss, and in fact, in order to have the same amount of elation in finding money as you had in despair for losing $50, to have the same amount of emotion and happiness, you'd have to find $125 on the street. It's 2.5 times. And so this explains a lot of things, like why people buy too much insurance and stuff like that, because they're afraid they're going to lose money. That's why why people buy insurance for cars at the rental car counter that they don't need. And so we can use that. Now, as an example, if we have a nice picture like this of this beautiful forest, and we have a message that says, you can, when you come off a trail, brush the mud off of your boots to remove invasive species so we can protect our lovely forests. That's going to be really helpful, right? That's a nice picture, and there's no doubt that's going to help get the message. But if we show a picture like this, and we say almost the same message, and we say, when you come off the trail, remove the mud from your boots and the invasive species, so you don't spread invasive species. Otherwise, we could lose our forests like this. We could have this forest could be destroyed like this one. That is a much more powerful message. Now, we have to be careful with this because there are some problems with negative advertising, but this will have about 2.5 times more emotion than the positive one. And that's why you go to a conference now on invasive species, somebody is going, at least one person is going to hold up this picture as an example with forest pests, and it shows the Toledo Street in 2006 before emerald ash borer came, and then the effect of emerald ash borer coming and destroying all of these trees by 2009. If you put your hand over, like I'm doing right now, the right-hand side and just look at the nice trees, and you think, oh yeah, I shouldn't move firewood, or I could lose those trees. That's not nearly as effective as, oh my God, look what happens if you move firewood and emerald ash borer comes into your neighborhood. So we should be looking for those kinds of things. So that's the end of, mostly the end of the presentation. I just want to say that, remember, when you're using these tools, it helps us to get through these adoption curves. So that's really important. Remember that everybody is at a different stage in that, of whether or not they're going in a different part of the spectrum. And so when you're talking to people, they're not the same. Some people are going to be easier to get involved than others. And then the last thing I just want to say is that when people are doing new behaviors, they have to really think. And this conscious behavior, we only have a certain amount of capacity for conscious behavior. As humans, we can do things unconsciously, like breathe or sweat if it's hot and that kind of thing. Subconscious behaviors are more like that your brain can do it out of habit. For instance, I'm sure people in the audience have driven to work and arrived there, and then they've realized that they've gotten there and they think, geez, I don't even remember driving to work today. That's because you've done it so often. You can drive all the way to work and get there without thinking about it. But driving is a very complicated thing. It's judging, to stop, watching for lights, making a left turn is very complicated. So you don't get hit by ongoing traffic, and also making sure there's nobody in the crosswalk before you turn. All of those things are very complicated, but with practice, it's something that we learn and it goes into our subconscious and we don't have to think about it. But if anybody that's had a 16-year-old child that's learning how to drive, you can, when they first start and their arms are rigid and they're worried and hitting the brakes and stopping 20 feet before the stop sign and all that, you realize that it's very conscious. So we need to remind people and work on social norms to try and get people's behaviors into the subconscious, so then they become habits and they don't even have to think about it. The good thing is that if you accomplish that, we all know that bad habits are hard to break, so are good habits hard to break. So if we can get people to always brush their boots and not plant invasive species, it'll stick. So thanks very much. That's the end of the presentation. Just one last thing is, I'm happy to answer any questions people will have. If you want, you can take your camera, you can scan that QR code there. And if you do, it'll take you to my website where, if you want, you can subscribe to a weekly newsletter that I produce and send around to subscribers around the world. If it's all on behavior change tips, and if you don't like it, there's always an unsubscribe link, and you can bow out. So that's it, Kelly. I can be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, awesome, Ken. That was really detailed, informative, and gave me some new information and ideas. That was great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to say I subscribe to your newsletter and it's awesome. So I encourage everyone to sign up. It's really, really good and funny and informative and interesting. So yeah, so it looks like I have a few questions already, and then I have some as well if we get time. How are you getting, so this person asked, how are you getting information about your online surveys to your target audience?
So yeah, so that's a really good question. I'll tell you what works really well if you can do it. Is we did a survey last year in New York State of watercraft inspectors watercraft owners. And we were able to, because our client was New York State Department of Environment and Conservation, they were able to send survey links out to a random sample of 40,000 people who owned watercraft, because you have to register, right? You have to register kayaks and canoes and everything in New York. So we're able to send it out via the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, who has that database. In Minnesota, the year before, we did an angler's survey. We were able to send it out again. Like, I never got the data for privacy reasons, but we provided the link, and they were able to send it out. Again, we used 40,000, and we sent it out to 40,000 registered anglers. So that, if you can do something like that, it's fantastic, because it happens in no time. Like you'll get 1,000 people in a day or two. But you can't always have that. So if you have associations that will help you, if you're trying to target gardeners, go to gardening clubs, get retailers to help you, that sort of thing. But then you can always buy Facebook advertising and try and put the link in Facebook clubs and pages and stuff like that too.
Yeah, I'll just add to that too. We did a survey a few years ago, and yeah, we used our partners, but used their mailing lists, and not all the groups were like invasive species related. They were a variety of groups. And then also it is a little expensive, but you can hire like a company to do your like distribution for you, like general across wherever you are as well. So yeah, that was a thorough answer. Thank you. Okay, so
there's one other thing, Kelly, is that you can SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics and others, they have panels, and you can just ask them to to do it. But that is expensive, as you say. But those survey panels,
Yeah.
people that are agreed to do surveys. So maybe that's what you were referring to too.
But that's interesting. Yeah, sometimes there's like consulting companies that do it. Like when I was with the Ontario Invasive Plant Council, we hired a consulting, but that's interesting about SurveyMonkey. I didn't know that. I'm gonna look into that. If you have like I know our subscription is, roughly 400. So like that's reasonable, 400 for a year. If you get that capability, like you can tap into the things that they provide. Okay, so the next question is from Julie. Would mail out surveys have a similar, would mail out surveys have a similar response rate as telephone surveys, assuming return postages?
So I don't know if the question is similar as they are now or similar as before, but generally they seem to be better than the telephone surveys, but they're still, like for instance, I saw a presentation last week. Some people in Minnesota, they put out a mail out survey, and they had, I think it was somewhere around 12 to 15%. So it's better, but not as good. The thing though is, like in Ontario, for instance, I've done some work with the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. They send it out to their membership or to like a mailback survey to their membership or to the registered anglers, and they get much better return rates.
Yeah, for sure, because they have that membership base already and it's quite large.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So this is from Mary. I think I know what she's referring to. Can you talk about the concerns you hinted at in terms of utilizing loss aversion? So I think you said that there's a possible negative effect that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be a little bit careful because you don't want people to feel it's all doom and gloom, I guess is the thing. So yeah. I think if I was going to do that, I would do it on a pilot basis first and test that messaging, maybe have some focus groups with people and see. But if you found out that people had 30 or 40% of the people you talked to and showed it to had a gut reaction of, oh God, that's awful. And it wasn't, why are you showing this to me? Then that's not a good way, because you're going to lose a lot of people there. So I would be really careful about testing it, but I'd be quite willing to test it, because if it would work, I'm quite confident that it would be much more effective.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think we've used a couple of images like that on some of our fact sheets and stuff, but we never really tested them, but that's a really good point. Okay, so this question is a really good question because I wonder about it myself sometimes. What cutting edge resources do you try to keep tabs on for learning how to apply new behavior change considerations to your or our line of work? Yeah,
no, that's a good question. Now, I'll tell you what, I read incessantly about this, and in my newsletter, I'm often recommending books. So this is the way. I was actually talking to a researcher last week about this, and she does a lot of research on behavior change. She does a lot of research on community engagement, and she was saying, "Oh, Ken, I'm so glad that you're working with the public using our research, because sometimes we think that our research just gets printed in a journal, nobody reads it, nobody uses it." And I said, I'm so glad that you are doing the research, because then I can learn from it. And I'm not a PhD, so I don't know how to do that research, and nor do I have any interest in doing it, but I can read the results. But I'll tell you, there's a happy medium even in between a person like her who's doing the research and a person like me who's trying to communicate that science. There's some really good books that some of these psychologists have written, and there's people like Dan Ariely. I'll type them into the chat here, but Dan Ariely is he was with Stanford, he's somewhere else now. He does a really good job on books. BJ Fogg is another author, Fogg, and there are others as well. The nice thing about these books is they use real life stories that are entertaining to drive home the message. So they're easy reads, they're kind of entertaining. Yeah, for sure. That's very helpful. I do want to get to this person's question. From
from David. This is a little bit more specific. My concern with respect to forestry machinery move. So very difficult to get all the soil and mud off of a tracked machine. Do you have any ideas for making an attitude shift with like forest machine operators? That's a little bit more specific.
I think like those people, first of all, some people are working for companies, and those companies need to adopt that as a best practice and require their people to do it. And so it's up to them to make sure that it happens. Or, you know, if there's at a gravel pit, people typically drive over a scale. They should also be driving through something that's washing their vehicles. People who are hiring, like municipalities that are hiring field workers and contractors, should be saying you've got to provide your invasive species plan, because you can't really reach out to all of those people, but you can use the proper levers to try and reach them. But it's challenging, no doubt.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. In Ontario, when I was with the Plant Council, we did a lot of work with the Clean Equipment Protocol, which was a great protocol, but again, sometimes it's difficult to get that information out there. So yeah, we'd work closely with like Ontario Parks started to adopt that, to enforce that in their like tenders when they'd hire people outside of the park to do work, to get them to learn that document and practice and like actually write it in the contract. And then we just noticed overall in general, it's what you touched on before, making it easier. So removing the barriers. So like if there's operators themselves, like to make sure if they're actually being, if they're an employee of another company, like making sure that they have the cleaning equipment and stuff like that in their vehicle, or if there's, when they get back to the yard, like a spot to actually easily clean, like the machine that they were using, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
and you can also support them in providing reminders to them. So
right.
I did some work. I do some of my work too is in health and in occupational health and safety. I did some work with the forestry industry in BC, and one of the concerns is that people should take have three-point contact when they're coming out of these big vehicles. Sometimes they'll jump down and break an ankle or something like that. So from a safety perspective, they should always have either two hands and a foot attached to the ladder coming down, or 2 feet and a hand. And that's called three-point contact. We developed, but this was about 7 or 8 years ago, we developed some magnets for inside the cab to remind people and all of these things. And I just happened to run into my client last month, and she said, I still see those magnets we had created everywhere in vehicles. So we, you know, that is a magnet that's not on the fridge. That is right where the person's supposed to do the action. So
yeah, that makes sense. Neat. Okay. I have a lot of thank yous here for your presentation and your newsletter. And then it looks like the last one, it's a little not quite invasive species, but more universal. Again, could probably lead to some good dialogue here. Dogs off leash in areas where they shouldn't be comes to mind. And actually, sometimes that is an issue for like areas of that are to be protected and with native plants and species at risk. Oh, sorry, I gotta move this. I can't see now. Are there any places who have fully solved common issues like that? Any comment on that?
Well, it's challenging for sure. I'm a dog owner, and some dog owners are just awful. They don't pick up after them, and they don't keep them on a leash. One thing I'll tell you though is try and figure out what the barriers might be, because I did some training one time, and this woman she worked very hard to protect nesting plovers, which are invasive, which are a species at risk in Nova Scotia here, and to get people to walk their dogs on the beach with a leash. And that's hard when you have a rambunctious dog that just loves to run through the water and along the beach. It's pretty hard to keep it on a leash. So what she decided to do was she assumed that people didn't do it because they didn't have a leash. So she put a nail in the post at the end of the boardwalk over the dune at the beach, and she bought 10 leashes and she put it on there, and she went the next day and they were all gone. The problem wasn't that people didn't have leashes. She made that assumption. They didn't want leashes, and somebody probably took them all and threw them in the garbage or something. That is not why they were letting their dogs run rampant. So
right. I know for me, it's not quite to do with leashing, but I noticed that this year, well, actually every year, but this year there's a park, like a provincial park, but it's a walking trail that they've kept open because of COVID, because usually they close it, but they probably want people walking and stuff. And just one simple thing that they could add, and I know they don't have a lot of staff to go visit, but it's just one simple thing, is a garbage can, just an open bin, because everyone picks up their dog poop and then leaves it in the bag at so just a barrier, right? Like if there's one garbage can, and I have seen a parks truck there, so I know that they do come. So if they just had one,
yeah,
but I know that also presents problems, but still, anyways.
yeah. One thing, Kelly, I just say that is, because you brought up COVID, there's a lot of things to be learned from what's happening with COVID.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I watch that really closely, and I use that example of Fauci and Trump, but there's so many examples of the social norms that have been established, and in some areas have worked better than in others. Quite often it's because poor leadership. Governments that have opened up too early, or have really not wanted to mandate masks or even encourage masks and all of that. There's so many opportunities to learn good things to do, and what you shouldn't do. And it's very, very much the same. The spread of that disease is very similar to the spread of invasive species, although the invasive species take longer.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think we're going to see a lot of interesting tidbits of information and research come out of this whole experience. So, okay, well, it's actually right on the dot at 2 o'clock. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. I see lots of comments. Fantastic presentation. Thank you. There's some links and things like that posted in the chat box. So thank you so much, Ken. Really enjoyed it as usual. Really picked up some good information. So I'm looking forward to putting that to use. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks for everyone for attending.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon. And thanks again, Ken.